Today we're going to be revisiting the Seattle years, from lunch at the bridge to breakfast in America. Alan, how are you, mate?
All right, mate, I'm good, yeah.
And when I say lunch at the bridge, because you were still playing at Arsenal, you were almost on the run from Terry Neal, you'd had the FA Cup final. You start the story because the connection came from a lunch at Stamford Bridge when you bumped into Bobby Moore.
Yeah, I was, as you say, I'd gone AWOL and I wasn't getting on with the manager, so I walked out. I wasn't getting paid. My missus had to go out to work to get some money. He worked in a restaurant. No, I was just getting by. And Christine Matthews at Stamford Bridge offered me, she said, we've got a spare box at the bridge. Would you like to run it? And I went, yeah, lovely, social. That's my kind of game. So I was there one day at a match, and I walked out at half time and to go to the gents, and I bumped into Bobby Moore, and I said, look, Bob, come in the box. And the boys I was with Dennis Waterman was in the box with me and a couple of other pals, and I said, the boys, I'd love to see you, come in and have a beer with me. And I never thought no more of it. Anyway, he walked in after the game and he said, what are you doing? Why aren't you, you should be out there playing. He said, you're 27. He said, it's ridiculous. You just waste. And he said, and then he mentioned that Jimmy Gabriel was in the restaurant and he'd been to Seattle and I would love it in Seattle and recommended it. And that's how it all came about.
Now, Jimmy Gabriel, when we roll it back almost 50 years to today, he left his mark on you in 1969, didn't he?
He did. He went over the top to me at Southampton. I was only a kid and finding my way in the game, but I did ask him about it when I was over there, and he said he was taking on some pill or something. His missus would give him something to liven him up or something. And he said, I got you mixed up with Ronnie Harris. I said, well, Jim, I said, I don't think so. I said, I had hair down my back and Ron had short back and sides. I said, how can you get us mixed up? He said, well, that just shows you how this pill was working, But it was lovely because Jimmy, I knew Jimmy as well. We went on a trip with Chelsea and Southampton and we got together socially. So I knew him. I knew of him and I knew about him and I knew he was a real good bloke. And, I was more than happy to sign for him.
And Southampton, they were a social team, literally, wasn't they? Bill Shankly had a name for the Southampton team, didn't he?
He called them the Owl House team, didn't he? After, they had a brawl at Anfield or at Southampton. But they could drink, but they could play as well. I mean, they had some good players, at that time. I mean, I watched them play the year before at the bridge when they beat Chelsea 6, and Ron Davis and Martin Chivers and young Mike Shannon was playing. That's the kind of trio they had up front, which today would be something phenomenal, really, when you think of British players. And this so they were a very, very good team, and obviously they had Jimmy in midfield. Jimmy would have played a lot more for Scotland had Jim Baxter not been playing, and also a little fella called Brian O'Neill who would kick his own granny if he had to, So they were a tough unit,
Because this is the thing, people say, well, the players in the past, it was all about socialising. It was, they used to go on the Raz after the game, they'd drink before games, they'd drink after games. Back in them days, it was a totally different game. But the one thing that I've always maintained, and books that I've read, is that you guys, you did play hard, but you trained even harder, didn't you?
Yeah, well, that was, it becomes second nature to me. I knew I had to, I knew that my strength was all in, I didn't have it in upper body strength. Someone like Tony Curry was very strong upstairs, and we had to make the most of what we had. And my strength was in my running, really. I knew if I kept myself fit and could outrun an opponent, then, the skill I had would see me through when they were tiring at the end of the game. I used to make more goals at the end of the game than I did any time. And I remember when Ericsson took over England and they was changing the team at half time, I said to someone, I said, I wouldn't have been no good playing under Ericsson because I didn't start running on till late in the game, and by that time he would have pulled me off at half time. You know, he was changing 11 players at half time, which was quite ludicrous because some players get stronger as the game goes on.
But again,
I was certainly one of them.
With some of those friendlies, it does make a mockery of it, and also just before you left, while you was at Arsenal, you know, people say, "Oh, Hudson, he was the one that turned down England to play against Brazil," but again, it's not as simple as that. You had a late call from Ron Greenwood. You wasn't particularly fit, and playing against one of probably the greatest team on the planet wouldn't have been ideal for you at that time, and wouldn't have been ideal for England neither, would it?
Well, I think once again, you know, managers.
Yes.
The first thing I would do as a manager, I would ask the player how he was and if he was fit, and it's something that amazed me with Arsenal, really, because I didn't really have a proper medical and I was injured there. Mm-hmm. And it was so unprofessional for a big club like Arsenal. I mean, it couldn't happen today. I wouldn't have passed a fitness test with this abdominal problem I had. And in fact, they shouldn't have bought me, really, in the state that I was in. Yeah. But Stoke were desperate for the money because of the roof blowing off. And, you know... they kind of thought, well, we're getting rid of Alan Ball, we'll bring him in, you know. So it was a change of events which didn't really make much sense for anybody.
And you had the call on the Friday while you were out socialising, and you know, so you had no time to even prepare for the game against Brazil as well. So in essence, there's no way that you could have actually joined up with England and made a difference for either you, Alan Hudson, or England against Brazil. It was ridiculous, and it was a late call up because somebody got injured. So you wasn't already in Greenwood's plans.
Well, it was actually a Sunday, Paul, because we played on the Saturday and at Highbury, I think, and I was in my local on the Sunday night, and obviously the squad gathers on a Sunday to play the game on a Wednesday, so I was in my local on a Sunday night, and somebody shouted out my name. You wanted on the phone? It's Ron Greenwood. I told him where to go because I thought someone was kidding me, and it was him, but. He should have asked me, really, on the phone, you know, if I was fit and everything else. And, I mean, you don't want to pick a player who's not in the right frame of mind anyway. Yeah. But I don't really know what the situation was with Ron. But as I say, I didn't know him. So I couldn't really be... I was very, very honest and frank with him and said, with the greatest respect, I'm not in... the right frame of mind to play. I'm still carrying a bit of an injury, and I don't really want to be anyone's substitute kind of thing, you know. And he accepted that, and it was fine. But the terrible thing was, I see him years later at Upton Park when I used to go over there, and I went to speak to him. But he was, I think he had the you know, he was losing the plot a little bit, you know. Was sad, which was very sad. So I couldn't really put my case across to him, you know. Mm.
Now, you're leaving Arsenal. You've had the call from Jimmy Gabriel. You're getting ready to fly out to the Great Northwest, the city that makes the Boeing aircraft. Did you have any offers from any English clubs, given the fact that you, at the time, were certainly in the top three performing midfield players, and you were only 27, so you were coming into the prime of your career? No,
I did have one. Strange, it's quite strange, really, when I left Chelsea to go to Stoke. That only one club come in for me, and when I went Stoke to Arsenal, I didn't even know I was leaving then, and Arsenal come in for me. Jimmy Robertson called me out of the blue and said you're leaving. I didn't know about that, so... And then nobody wanted me when I was leaving Arsenal, but I could quite understand that in a way because I walked out on the club. But Arsenal were stupid, really, because they were you know, they should have kind of let people know that there was no trouble. I weren't a troublemaker, but instead of that, they kind of let it know that I'd gone AWOL. So who's going to buy a player who walks out on a football club? No one really. But that's like when I was having trouble at Chelsea. People like Waddington can understand that.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Gabriel was in that mould. You know, he could understand. I sat with him and I told him why I'd walked out on Arsenal, and he said, "Well, I don't blame you." Yeah. So he signed me. He was delighted with signing me. He got me for, you know, half the money that Arsenal paid for me was cut down price. So everyone was happy, really.
And what was it like going out there? I'm guessing you didn't know much about the NASL prior. You'd seen bits because we were all aware of how big the American scene was in the 70s with George going out there, Pelle's out there, Cruyff. Everyone and everybody is over there in America. But what did you know about Seattle before you arrived there, Al?
I knew absolutely nothing about Seattle at that time, only what Bobby told me. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even know that Jeff Thurston. There was quite some players I knew that played over there before me, funnily enough. Jimmy Robertson, who was at Stoke with me. Tommy Baldwin had a spell there, was at Chelsea with me. But I knew nothing at all about the place. And it was quite strange, really, because I couldn't wait to get back playing. I really missed playing and keeping fit, and although I was out running every day. But then when I got there, I just fell in love with the whole city straight away. So that was quite easy to settle in.
How different was Seattle when you first arrived by looking at your surroundings, you knew accommodation, compared to what you'd been used to at Stoke and in London as well?
Well, I found it a breath of fresh air, because it was great over there, and I can see why George went there and other players went there, because they didn't know who we were. You know, you have a drink in Chelsea or Stoke and it all goes back to the manager, or, you know, they can't wait to make a phone call and say you're out. But over there, they don't even know you are. You know, nobody takes any notice. They don't know. You know, soccer players, as they call them, they don't know who we were. I was a captain of Seattle and nobody knew me, so it was great. And I just used to socialise with them as if I was just one of them, really. Yeah. So it was really nice not to have to worry about going into training next day and someone to grass you up, you know.
Now, in your brilliant book, the Working Man's Ballet, you wrote in one of your chapters that you were born to play in America, and looking at your lifestyle, reading your books, talking to you, get to knowing you, I think you were born to play there in the States. Everything that they had to offer was there for you, and it's almost as though, I know Stoke was the best time in your footballing career because you played your best football there, but at Seattle you seemed so settled and comfortable and literally like you was born to play there.
Yeah, well, I think I was born to live life to the full, and there's no better place in the world to do that than in America. Mm-hmm. And I just loved the city, and I loved my favourite was going away to play four games in 10 days and going on an away trip to New York and Tampa, Fort Lauderdale, Washington, you know, playing against all the other great players. And it was basically a working man's holiday. Yeah. Only you could, you know, I really did keep myself fit. So, and I had to be a little bit more of an example because of the way I lived, and I was the first player really to sign a long contract over there, because those were the days when people only used to go there at the end of the season on a kind of a loan deal, you know. Yeah. So I was their first long time signing, really.
And you had a nice little house. I'm guessing throughout your career you met many barmen, but you literally lived next to the barmans in Seattle, didn't you?
Yes, I went to post a letter one day. Went up to see if I had any mail in my little pigeonhole, and then next door to me, I see the name Barman there, and I thought, well, it was meant to be. So, and I became great friends with them. They were from California, we were from London, so we had a lot to talk about. We had parties at my house, and they were always invited. Whereas in London, they tried to close me down.
Yeah.
They'd phone the police and say, he's having another one of his parties. But that weren't the way in America, because America is a very social country.
Now, did you just have the one house in America? Was that the one in the hills of Bellevue?
Yes, I had that. Then I bought a smaller one in Tampa Bay, where I went down and fell in love with when I played there. And that was but that was a lot cheaper. That wasn't to live in. That was just to go down, because I just loved the place and thought it would be nice to stay there, on holidays.
Now, your debut for Seattle, what was it like? Who did you play against? And was you quarter-zoned before that first game that you played there?
The first game, strangely enough, was against Tulsa. It was against Alan Hinton's team.
Okay.
He was manager of Tulsa, I believe. And I remember what they used to do in them days, because like us, they used to inject cortisone into. I still had that bad ankle, and I remember being injected, and the doctor obviously only injected me for the 90 minutes. And if you draw over there, then you play on and till a goal scored, or you go into overtime. So quarter of an hour each way overtime. So the drug had worn off, and I was running on this ankle which had been injected, and the thing had worn off. So I was excruciating pain, and I had to walk off. So that was a bit of my first match was a little bit like the Southampton one, although losing 5-0, a bit of a disaster, because I really wanted to show my worth and didn't get the chance to.
And again, America being a hot country, I assume, because Seattle is in the northwest, it's above California, isn't it? It's, almost the opposite to where you put a postage stamp. I'm guessing the ground was quite hard. How did your ankle cope with that, or did they bring in the fire brigade?
Our stadium was indoor with AstroTurf, and it had a bit of a sponge to it, so it wasn't as bad as some of the pitches over there, which were like playing on the M6.
Yeah.
And our training ground, Renton, it rained so much in Seattle, it was always wet, so that was always give that a bit of a soft touch on the surface. So I got through it all right. But I say to people quite regularly, they say, you love the sun and you love being out in the sun. And I did. I said, but I was in Seattle for 4 years and we hardly got any sunshine, but I never noticed it because I was enjoying myself so much. It was such a great place to be. There's so much to do, and the people were great, and I was just born to live there, and that's when I started writing the book, The Working Man's Ballet, and I remember the first night I thought, this is going to be my resting place, and I was really convinced that I would never come back, but then just when you think you've cracked it, something happens.
Again, we'll touch upon that a little bit later in this episode, but with all chapters of your life, there's something that just goes unbelievably wrong, isn't there?
Well, yeah, I thought but this was a little bit later, when I went back to Stoke, when I was offered the manager's job by the chairman there, and he died on the morning of my getting to Stoke. I just don't know where I went that day. I don't know where my mind was. 1 minute I was on the train from London to Stoke thinking I was going to be the next Stoke manager. And then when I phoned the ground, as he told me to do, the girl on the reception told me he died 5 o'clock that morning or 6 o'clock that morning. So I'd have gone down the night before, I'd have probably been the manager.
It's amazing, isn't it?
So it's, things, we broke the record in Seattle as well. We broke the New York Cosmos record. We had a superb team. We played brilliantly that year. But the owners, who were great people, they were But they were a lovely Italian family, the Clucios. They just couldn't take the loss anymore. You know, I think we averaged 28,000, but for some reason they were losing money and they couldn't take it anymore. It might have been down to health reasons or something, but it was such a shame. And then we had, you know, when you get one bad American, you get a bad American, and that's what we got, who come in and took over.
Now, you had some great times at the training ground, or before you even got there. A big box of US dollars and a goalkeeper. Talk to me about that. That was a bit of a situation, wasn't it?
Well, the terrible thing about that is it was before I got there, and I had three great friends there, really. One was Roy Greaves from Bolton. One was Steve Buttle. He was a great player he played at Bournemouth, and he was a terrific player. I loved playing with him. And the other was a big 6'3", 6'4", overweight Russian American goalkeeper, and called Mike Ivanhoe. And I used to get on like house on fire with him. And he was like a scout. Wherever we went over the country, he would go and find all the bars and everything else. He was like the lookout. And just before the 6 months before I got there, the story goes that he got into training, and he was out of season. He was working for his dad in the bank, and he embezzled the bank. And two of my pals, Adrian Webster and Tommy Jenkins, they got to training, and he said to them, "Do you want to train today, or do you want to go to Vegas?" So they thought he was kidding, and they said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he opened the trunk of his car, and there were like all these dollars. He embezzled the bank, and he was on his way to Vegas. So off they went. The three of them went to SeaTac Airport and flew to Vegas instead of going in the training ground. And I think that had I been there, I'd have been there with them. And I believe they went there for a long weekend and was there for about 10 days and never come out of the room.
What happened when they come back to Seattle? Didn't Jimmy Gabriel go ballistic?
Well, I think it might have been a pre-season or something. But I think Jimmy was so short of players at that time, he couldn't really do anything because he needed them. I mean, he was an unbelievable character. Ivanhoe was I tried my hardest when I was captain and then became assistant coach. I tried my hardest. I sat him down one day. We were around my house having a drink, and I said, "Look, you've got to go on a diet, and you've got to start training better. You know, you got to lose some weight, or you know, you got to start playing." Because we have another fellow, a German American called Jack Browne, who was a very good goalkeeper, and I said, "Come on, give him a fight for your place, you know." But it was too much for him. He couldn't do it. He was too busy enjoying himself. So bless him. But he was a great pal of mine. But I did miss out on the Vegas trip, and I've never wished to go there with anyone else but him. So I wouldn't bother.
Now, some of the great players that you played against in America, you played against Johan Cruyff.
Well, Johan Cruyff, I've always said, is the best player I've ever played against because of the performances he put in against, you know, when we was on the field together. Mm-hmm. You know, there's obviously George and people like that, but he just happened to be phenomenal when I played against him. And we had a fellow over there called Bogacevic who played in midfield for New York. He was a big Yugoslav, fantastic player, and I loved him. I loved playing against him as well, and you really had to be at your best to play against him. And then they had the great Giorgio Chinaglia, who was at Swansea at one time, and they kicked him out, and he went there to break all the records over there, centre forward. He was like the mafia boss over there. You know, you went up to toss up the coin before a game with Giorgio, and he was like talking to Don Corleone. You know, it was fantastic, and he was such a gentleman. And you always know he'd score. So, you know, they were the kind of characters out there. You know, New York had so many players. I remember the first time I played at New York, they had you'll know this fellow, played at Coventry, Steve Hunt.
Yeah.
Not long before he'd been in the England team, and yet he was on the bench. He couldn't even get in their team. That's how good they were. So they had players from all over the world. I couldn't name them. I think they had 3 World Cup finalists in their team when I first played there. 3 Dutch World Cup winning teams that played against West Germany.
And I'm guessing, being a massive fan of Frank Sinatra, you loved New York, and One for My Baby was...
Well, yeah. I mean, it was really New York and Chicago with Frank. It was all the piano bars in New York and the restaurants in Chicago. It was like mafia time, which are my favourite movies and my favourite music, my favourite kind of generation, if you like. I'm still reading The Godfather today. So I did love that side of it, and the characters in these places. It was terrific existence. You couldn't get in. They talk about London, the greatest city in the world, but New York was something else.
And the actual stadiums in the NASL, because they're all franchises over there, wasn't they? And you looked at that game and you thought, it's got to kick off with all these stars that are playing in America, and for some reason it didn't. And then a few years after you left, it pretty much folded, and it's the Major League Soccer now, isn't it? It is a different it's the same format, but it's a different league, isn't it?
Well, I always knew that they would come forward, because it was just a matter of allowing them kids to grow up, and there was so many British over there that their kids and grandchildren would grow up and they would have the opportunity to play, and that's all come to fruition now. It's all and there's players from all over the world, Hispanic, and so many different players. In LA you play against them, in Chicago you play against the Germans. It was just a certainty that it was going to happen one day, and that has come true now.
But going back to when you were there, was you surprised, Al, when it actually pretty much folded football there in America?
Well, I wasn't.
Yeah.
When I left, it was still going pretty strong when I left. I mean, I left in a blur, really, because I was in kind of shock. But there was still a future in the NASL. So I really, when I come back to play, and I was busy trying to get another club back here, and then I kind of forgot about it over there. And I did tell the truth, Paul. I couldn't even tell you when it folded and how it folded and why. It was just there was too many owners going over there who were pretenders, really. I think one was the geezer that used to be in charge of Portsmouth. He was one of the big owners over there. They used to make out they had all this money, and the next thing you know, they weren't paying their bills, and Tampa Bay weren't paying their bills and weren't paying the wages and things like that. So it had to come to an end. But now they're doing it on a professional basis.
Talk to me about the Waterfront Hotel. Did Pelly really catch a shark from his bedroom window?
This is what I was told.
Yeah.
Only he could do it. Well, Mike Ivanhoe could do it, I would think. But we stayed down on the Waterside Hotel when our first trip there, and it was known for Pele staying with New York Cosmos and catching a shark out the window. So you can take that as it is. There was no pictures of it.
Yeah.
But I can only say if anyone was going to catch a shark, it would be him.
And Sean Caden said, "Hi guys, awesome to have you back on. Best regards, Al. What an era in the NASL it was in the 70s, and the goal from George Best was probably the best ever." What's your take on that, Al?
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched that, and George wasn't having, they never really see the best of George Best, but they just see a sprinkle of him really there. I think he'd be about 6 players inside about 10 yards, and and scored. I mean, they'd never see American soccer fans, even English fans. I mean, I still listen to Stoke fans saying about George scored a goal at the Victoria Ground one day where he beat 4 defenders in the round about the penalty area and 6-yard box and put it past Bank.
And to listen to the rest of this podcast, head on over to www.patreon.com/SRB Media. Thank you.